What happens when one of literature's most toxic love stories gets reimagined by one of today's most provocative filmmakers? In this video from History Calling, I give you my review of Wuthering Heights, the much-anticipated new adaptation of Emily Bronte's classic novel, directed by Emerald Fennell and starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. Does this version finally make Wuthering Heights work for modern audiences, or does it push the story too far? I'm going to tell you why you should and shouldn't see this movie. Chapter 1. A summary of the book. Let's begin with a summary of the Emily Brontë book for those of you who are new to the story or who need a refresher. To be clear, this video will contain heavy spoilers for both the book and the movie, and it's also not going to have many visual changes unlike my regular videos due to how fast I've had to get it out after seeing the film. If you don't need a book plot summary, I'll put a timestamp on screen now so that you can jump ahead. Though published in 1847, Wuthering Heights is set partly in the 1770s and 1780s and partly in the very early 1800s. It opens in late 1801 when a Mr. Lockwood, who is from the south of England, rents Thrushcross Grange in Yorkshire. He is our first narrator and he tells us of his visit to his new landlord, who is called Heathcliff. This serves as both his first name and his surname. Heathcliff at this point is about 38 years old and he is described elsewhere in the book as being of an ambiguous ethnicity. Brontë calls him a dark-skinned gypsy or looking like a little Lascar or an American or Spanish castaway. At the end of the book he's also referred to as having been a little dark thing in his youth. In 1801 he lives at the estate close to Thrushcross, which is called Wuthering Heights. Living with him are his widowed teenage daughter-in-law called Catherine Heathcliff, formerly Linton, a servant called Joseph, and a rough-mannered man called Hareton, who we'll later realise is Heathcliff's nephew and Catherine's cousin. Lockwood is unsettled by the hostility, strange relationships and gloomy atmosphere in the house. Trapped by bad weather and the pitch black of the Yorkshire countryside, he spends a difficult night at Wuthering Heights, where he dreams that the ghost of young Catherine Heathcliff's mother, Catherine Earnshaw, is begging to be let in. He falls ill, and as he recuperates at Thrushcross Grange, he asks the housekeeper, Ellen or Nellie Dean, to explain the history of the two households. Much of the rest of the novel is largely Nellie's account, occasionally interrupted by letters or Lockwood's commentary. Years earlier, in 1771, Mr. Earnshaw, the owner of Wuthering Heights, returns from a trip to Liverpool with a destitute orphan boy aged about 7, whom he names Heathcliff. Mr. Earnshaw raises Heathcliff alongside his own children, Hindley, then 14, and Catherine, then 6, and who I'm going to call Cathy for the rest of the review to help to distinguish her from her future daughter of the same name. Cathy and Heathcliff develop an intense, wild bond rooted in shared rebellion and emotional dependence. Hindley, however, grows jealous and hateful towards Heathcliff. When Mr. Earnshaw dies in 1777, Hindley inherits Wuthering Heights and immediately demotes Heathcliff to the status of a labourer, denying him education and subjecting him to considerable physical abuse. He has also now married a woman called Frances. One day, Cathy and Heathcliff spy on the neighbouring Linton family at Thrushcross Grange. This family comprises Mr. and Mrs. Linton and their children, Edgar and Isabella. After Cathy is badly bitten by the family dog, she stays with the Lintons for weeks to recuperate, and when she returns to Wuthering Heights at Christmas 1777, she is more refined and conscious of social class and appearance. Heathcliff, now visibly excluded, becomes increasingly alienated. Hindley's wife, Frances, dies shortly after giving birth to their son, Catherine Earnshaw, in 1778. This is the rough man that Mr. Lockwood meets as an adult in 1801, living with Heathcliff. 2 years later, Cathy agrees to marry Edgar Linton despite being in love with Heathcliff, who overhears her telling Nellie that she can't marry her social inferior. Devastated, he runs away and only returns 3 years later in 1783, now mysteriously wealthy. By this point, Cathy is recently married to Edgar, whose parents have died, and left Thrushcross Grange to Edgar's male heirs, or failing that to the children of his sister Isabella. Heathcliff is obsessed with getting revenge on those who have wronged him, namely Cathy's brother Hindley and her husband Edgar. He courts Isabella, leading Edgar to banish him from Thrushcross Grange, much to Cathy's distress, while at Wuthering Heights he manipulates Hindley, who has a drinking problem, into gambling away his remaining property. He elopes with and marries Isabella in early 1784. This is what makes him the uncle of Edgar and Cathy's son, in order to hurt her brother and gain power over her inheritance, and the marriage is a failure as he is cruel to her and doesn't love her. Meanwhile, Cathy has become pregnant soon after her marriage, but she is desperately ill thanks to the stress of dealing with the situation between her husband and her one true love. During a dramatic confrontation in her sick room, Cathy and Heathcliff reunite privately and declare their love for each other. Hours later, she gives birth to her daughter Catherine on the 20th of March 1784, and 2 hours after that, Cathy Earnshaw Linton, the main female protagonist of the whole novel, dies aged only 18. Heathcliff is absolutely beside himself with grief, begging her to stay with him even if only as a ghost. Isabella can't take this, and, pregnant herself, she leaves him and gives birth to their weak and sickly son Linton Heathcliff in the south of England. Hindley dies 6 months after his sister. The story now shifts to the second generation of these families. Catherine Jr. has grown up at Thrushcross Grange, unaware that her uncle and maternal cousin Catherine Earnshaw live nearby, though she discovers this one day upon sneaking away from her home. As we saw at the beginning of the book when Mr. Lockwood met him, Heathcliff has deliberately raised Hareton to be uneducated and rough, mirroring how Hindley treated him, and Catherine is disgusted to discover that they are related, as she mistook him for a servant initially. Meanwhile, little Linton is raised away from his father, but when he is 12, Isabella dies and Linton is brought to the neighbourhood by his uncle Edgar, where he meets his cousin Catherine, now 13. The next day, however, Heathcliff insists that his son be brought to him to be raised at Wuthering Heights, despite despising the boy. Catherine does not know where he has gone, but finds out years later when she is 16 and forms an attachment to Linton, to whom she writes letters, until Nellie discovers her and makes her stop. When Heathcliff tells Catherine that Linton is wasting away without her love, though, she goes to him. They end up spending quite a bit of time together as Linton's health deteriorates, and eventually Heathcliff forces Catherine to marry his son by literally kidnapping her and Nellie Dean and refusing to let them out of Wuthering Heights until after the marriage in August 1801. Heathcliff then gains control of Thrushcross Grange after Edgar's death, which happens almost immediately afterwards. Linton dies soon after the marriage to young Catherine too, leaving her trapped under Heathcliff's authority, and we also learn that in his obsession with her mother, Heathcliff had Cathy's grave opened and found her to be intact rather than decomposed, having the sexton who dug her up promise that when he, Heathcliff, dies, he will be laid next to her with the sides of each of their coffins removed so that they will decompose together. This, by the way, is exactly what George II had done with his wife, Caroline of Ansbach, and I have to wonder if Emily Brontë knew that story and copied it. I'll leave my video about Caroline's death linked for you if you want to learn more. This brings us up to November 1801, when Mr. Lockwood is renting Thrushcross. He decides to leave, but comes back after 8 months in order to pay his rent. He meets Nellie again, who is now working at Wuthering Heights, and she tells him that Catherine and Hareton formed a romantic attachment and confronted Heathcliff about stealing their properties. He withdrew into himself, unable to bear seeing Cathy's eyes looking at him through her daughter and nephew, and stopped eating, being found dead a few days later in Cathy's old room in the spring of 1802, having been in a strange mood for days and possibly seeing Cathy's ghost. Indeed, locals claim to see their spirits wandering the moors together. As for young Catherine, she and her cousin Hareton plan to marry on New Year's Day 1803, and she is teaching him to read. Lockwood visits the quiet churchyard where Cathy, Edgar and Heathcliff are buried, ending the novel with an eerie sense of peace. If you'd like to learn more about Emily Brontë and her famous family, plus the writing, publication and initial reception of the book, see my video all about the Brontës, which I'll link on screen and below for you. Chapter 2. The Movie Plot. Okay, so that's the book, but what about the movie? Does it respect the source material? And why have there been so many controversies about everything from the casting to the costumes? Well, first up, a huge chunk of the book isn't dealt with, namely the story of the second generation, looking at Heathcliff and Cathy's respective children. It just isn't there, nor are Mr. Lockwood or Cathy's brother Hindley shown in the movie. This means that Hindley's whole storyline of hating and torturing Heathcliff is gone, as are his marriage and son. I can understand why Fennell chose not to use the second half of the book so as not to bloat her movie and have to introduce a largely new cast halfway through, but the decision to cut Hindley removes a lot of Heathcliff's motivation for revenge later in the film, as well as much of his character development, which came about in the book due to his difficult relationship with his quasi-brother. The movie attempts to get around this by having the character of Cathy's father, played brilliantly by Martin Clunes in quite a rare serious role for him, be a hateful, abusive drunk who beats Heathcliff terribly when the children stay out too late, leaving scars across his back and basically trauma bonding Cathy and Heathcliff thanks to the miserable childhood they have with him. If he hates Heathcliff so much though, why does he keep him in the house? It's a bit of a plot hole and not the last one we'll discuss in this review. These changes also mean, just by the by, that the famous Kate Bush song based on the book, which deals with Cathy's ghost, has no meaning in this adaptation as we never see that part of the novel represented. With so much of the book plot stripped away, what we are left with is the basic story of Catherine and Heathcliff. He is still brought to their home, though this time as a young teen rather than a 7-year-old, and raised alongside her, falling in love with her in the process. Here I must give a shout out to the actors who play the younger versions of the two characters in the first section of the movie, Owen Cooper and Charlotte Mellington. They both do brilliant jobs, bringing out the strength of these characters' personalities and bond, and of course Cooper is now getting all sorts of accolades for his role in Netflix's Adolescence, which he filmed before this. He's definitely an actor to watch in the future. The character of Nellie Dean, a housekeeper in the book, is here presented as a lady's companion to Catherine and as the illegitimate daughter of a lord who becomes jealous of Cathy and Heathcliff's relationship, something which will have dire consequences for all later in the story. Back to the plot though, and the adult versions of the characters. Despite being raised together in Yorkshire, Cathy and Heathcliff have wildly different accents, with Margot Robbie using a southern English, almost Kate Winslet-esque accent, and Jacob Elordi committing to the Yorkshire pronunciations, which I thought he did very well, especially as that's not an easy accent for outsiders. There is no explanation for this, and I can't understand why Robbie, who is excellent at doing accents other than her own, didn't go Yorkshire for this too. Edgar and Isabella Linton move into Thrushcross Grange as adults, and in this version of the story, she is his ward rather than his sister, presumably to get around the fact that one actor is half Pakistani and the other is white, though they still have the same surname and no mention is made of anyone's skin colour in the film. Deciding to spy on them one day by herself, Cathy ends up falling and twisting her ankle. Then, in what is surely the longest convalescence in the history of cinema for such a slight injury, she spends 6 weeks with them and comes back with nicer clothes and hair and having apparently made quite the impression on Edgar. Heathcliff is mad that Cathy stayed away so long and seems to have a soft spot for Edgar, and later on she receives an offer of marriage from the latter, which she hesitantly accepts. She is very unsure of her decision though, and confides in Nellie that she doesn't know if she should go through with it as she loves Heathcliff. This is one of those scenes where Miss Robbie shines, as you really feel her distress at not knowing what she should do and her torment at wanting Heathcliff but not feeling that she can marry him as they'd both be destitute and everyone would be better off financially if she wed Edgar. In the course of the conversation though, in classic thoughtless Cathy style, she insults Nellie by saying that she has never loved or been loved, and so when Nellie sees Heathcliff listening at the door, she doesn't let on to Cathy. Heathcliff hears Cathy saying it would degrade her to marry him and leaves Wuthering Heights immediately, broken-hearted and without hearing the part where she says she loves him. Cathy wants to call off the engagement, but when she discovers Heathcliff is gone, she waits a year, there's no explanation as to how she got Edgar to agree to such a protracted engagement, then goes through with the wedding and moves to Thrushcross Grange. There, she, Edgar, and Isabella live a gilded life, frittering away their time and apparently endless supply of money on pointless pursuits, and in Isabella's case, a very inappropriate Christmas present for Cathy, but I won't spoil the reveal for you. Another 4 years pass, and shortly after discovering she is pregnant, Cathy is reunited with Heathcliff, who returns inexplicably rich and having had a shave and a haircut, a much better look for him by the way, and buys Wuthering Heights. He is cold and distant with her though, promising that he will take advantage of Isabella's instant fancy for him just to hurt Cathy for abandoning him. Soon though, after the death of her father, he and Cathy begin a torrid affair, which takes place all over the house at both Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights, as well as on the moors, apparently without any of the servants noticing or interfering or even questioning where their mistress is going in the middle of the day. In the course of this affair, they repeatedly declare their love for one another, and Cathy discovers that Heathcliff overheard her on the day of her engagement and that Nellie didn't tell her. Angered at the betrayal, which she calls treason, she attempts to fire Nellie, but this never comes to pass, as Edgar says she doesn't have to go. Instead, having become aware of his wife's affair with Heathcliff, Edgar forbids Cathy from seeing him again, and when she breaks off the relationship with her lover, he goes to Isabella instead and elopes with her, having first told her that he doesn't love her and is only marrying her to hurt Cathy. She is weirdly fine with this, and the two of them enter into a very disturbing BDSM-style relationship, which includes her pretending to be a dog on a chain on the floor at one point. It's all super weird, but it is the only real attempt to show the awful Heathcliff of the book, though having Isabella content to go along with it really dulls the barbarity of his character, allowing him to remain the romantic hero that I guess Emerald Fennell wants him to be. Meanwhile, Cathy is pining away without Heathcliff, losing both her physical and mental health. She tells Nellie that she lost the baby, but Nellie thinks she is lying, and once again proves herself to be the quiet villain of the movie by secretly burning Heathcliff and Isabella's letters to Cathy asking to make up with her, and encouraging Edgar to stay away from his wife. It turns out, though, that Cathy did miscarry and has gone septic as a result. By the time Nellie, who seems to be the only person in the vast Thrushcross Grange who is actually attending on the lady of the house, realises how ill she is, it's too late. Cathy dies with Edgar by her side, who she hallucinates is Heathcliff. The real Heathcliff arrives too late to see her one last time before she goes, and the movie ends with him crying over her corpse and thinking back to when they were children. These last scenes are truly tragic, and I don't mind telling you, the actors and director had me in tears. Chapter 3. Characterisation. As I've alluded to already, Heathcliff has been significantly softened from the book, where he is truly toxic and abusive, especially to Isabella. Here, he's still a tortured soul, but a lot of the torturing he does has been removed, otherwise you'd honestly be hoping for his death. Cathy acts like a teenager in a grown woman's body. She is petulant and cruel, seemingly without realising the damage she does and the hate she sometimes engenders from the likes of Nellie and Isabella, the latter of whom she humiliates and assaults in front of Heathcliff. She loves her father and yet despises him at the same time, crying over his body one moment and kicking him the next until his false teeth pop out, a rare moment of levity in the movie. Her father, meanwhile, is emotionally unstable and unpredictable, sometimes loving, sometimes disgusting, and pretty repugnant throughout. He is a drunk who squanders all their money, leaves them in debt, and guilt-trips Cathy over minor infractions or for daring to stay away from him after her marriage. You can certainly appreciate why she has such mixed feelings for him, and Fennell and her actors do a good job of showing how twisted, complex, and emotionally draining such relationships can be. As for Isabella, to me, hers was the weirdest character in this movie. She seems to be mentally stunted, much more so than Cathy. She acts like a young teenager in an adult's body who plays with dolls, wears childish dresses and hairstyles, gets fixated first on Cathy, who she makes a creepy doll of, complete with the real woman's hair stolen from Cathy's hairbrush, and then Heathcliff. She really doesn't seem very stable and is very uncomfortable to watch, which I think was the point, so kudos to Alison Oliver for her performance. Nellie Dean, as I've said, is arguably low-level evil, manipulating Catherine, Heathcliff and Edgar over the course of several years and ultimately leading to their doom. Now this is interesting as you can read her in the book as being far less benign than she wants to appear. She does see Heathcliff listening to her and Cathy's conversation in which Catherine says she loves him but can't marry him, and she doesn't tell her young mistress this. I liked Fennell's decision to give her a lot more screen time and look at her motivations to the extent she does, and I thought the actress, Hong Chau, did a fine job of showing this complex character who loves Catherine and yet torments her at the same time. Edgar Linton felt quite underdeveloped to me. We don't see his courtship of Cathy, and so we don't see what he loves in her beyond her obvious beauty. When he discovers her affair via Nellie, his reaction to it is pretty muted, for reasons which aren't really drawn out either, though I inferred that he's just so in love with her that he'd forgive her nearly anything and doesn't want to risk losing her. His decision to leave her pregnant and wilting away in her bedroom because Nellie tells him to seems weak and even cruel though, and I question why he didn't raise Isabella to be, frankly, more normal. The only other characters of note in the movie are two servants, Joseph, played by the criminally underused Ewan Mitchell of House of the Dragon fame, and Zilla. They have little to do with the plot beyond a very naughty encounter in a stable involving a bridal, which seems to be in the movie just to push Cathy and Heathcliff together. Chapter 4. Casting. The casting for this movie has received a lot of attention, much of it negative. Now this is a high quality cast and all the actors, who include Oscar nominees and an Emmy winner, are excellent at their jobs. I certainly can't fault their performances. It is their looks and ages which have attracted criticism. The most striking example of this is of course Cathy and Heathcliff. In the novel, the main part of their love story takes place when they are in their mid to late teens and Cathy is dead at 18. By contrast, Margot Robbie was 34 at the time of filming and Jacob Elordi 27. This causes a lot of lapses within the internal logic of the movie. Their decision-making skills remain at teenager level, even though they are mature adults with fully developed prefrontal cortexes. It's also ridiculous that someone of Catherine's age and good looks isn't married by her late 20s considering the time period this is set in, and it's nuts that the two of them didn't ever begin an affair while they were in their teens and 20s given their obvious mutual attraction, and the actors do have great chemistry by the way. Now I understand the need to have slightly older actors in movies so that they can have more experience and can handle the more mature aspects of the story. However, it would have been possible to get an excellent actress much closer to the proper age. For example, think of someone like Millie Bobby Brown, 20 to 21 years old at the time of filming, with plenty of work experience and a great range. Margot Robbie, who also produces Wuthering Heights, has said that she asked to be Cathy though, and to be honest, I wonder if Emerald Fennell quietly felt like she couldn't say no to her famous producer, though she has stated in interviews that she was happy to have Robbie in the role. Whatever the answer, I think both of them should have realised that she just wasn't the right fit for this part. As for looks, the Cathy of the book has brown ringlets, whereas Robbie has straight blonde hair, and Heathcliff is meant to be dark-skinned, not a white guy. The decision to cast Elordi as Heathcliff, though this is one of the few major characters in classic English literature who is not portrayed as white in the book, is all the more puzzling as Fennell seems to want points for colourblind casting elsewhere with the use of the ethnically Vietnamese Chau to play the adult Nellie and Shazad Latif, who is part Pakistani, as Edgar Linton. I'm sorry, but for me, colourblind casting in one area does not offset whitewashing in another. Chau's age is also an issue here. She is meant to be essentially the same age as Catherine, maybe a couple of years older, and that is how the younger versions of them are portrayed early in the film. Chau is 11 years older than Robbie, however, and when we switched to the adult versions of the characters, I found this age gap to be obvious and distracting. You're left wondering why one has aged so much more than the other. Robbie is also clearly older than Elordi too, but again, as youngsters, they are obviously meant to be about the same age. All the actors, with the exception of Clunes, whose makeup and false teeth are evidently designed to make him more haggard looking, also suffer from the phenomenon known as iPhone face. This basically means that they are too modern and good-looking to be believable for this time period. It kind of looks like they have an iPhone filter on them. Actors' teeth are usually the best indicator of this, as modern dentistry means they normally have pearly white smiles as opposed to the much poorer dental hygiene available in the 18th century. But their perfect skin, manicured eyebrows, and in Robbie's case, clearly dyed blonde hair also give the game away, and make it harder to suspend our disbelief that they are in the 1770s and 1780s and not the 2020s. I'm afraid I have to agree with other critics that many of these actors, as good as they are at their jobs, were just hopelessly miscast for this particular project, though it pains me to say this with regard to Robbie in particular, as she is actually one of my favourite actresses. Chapter 5. Setting. The movie is set in the 1770s and 1780s, as I said, in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. It is very stylised, though. The interiors of the houses, particularly Thrushcross Grange, bear little resemblance to real stately homes of this time period, and I say that as someone who has visited a lot of them, including in Yorkshire. The walls look shiny, for instance, whereas what you'll actually see if you visit somewhere like Harewood House, which is near Leeds, is wooden panelling, printed wallpaper or plaster. The floors are sometimes shiny too, like lino, and bright red in one instance, and there often isn't enough furniture in the rooms, which are almost minimalistic, which, let me tell you, the Georgians were not. This is clearly a deliberate choice, and it's something you're either going to love or hate. Personally, I don't see the point in making what is meant to be a period piece if you won't commit to making it period authentic, but that's just me. As for the exteriors, many of these were shot in the real Yorkshire, which I assume was meant to add a layer of authenticity to the whole thing. The landscapes are certainly stunning, but the northern English weather has been completely overdone here. Almost every external shot, it seems, was either drenched in rain, shrouded in mist, or both. Now, I have friends from Yorkshire and have spent quite a bit of time there in all seasons. Let me tell you, it does not rain anywhere near as much as this movie suggests, nor is the place cloaked in fog all the time. For goodness sake, it's not even that far north. All of Scotland is above it. It's actually very warm and beautiful in the summer and not much worse than Northern Ireland in the winter, just a little bit chillier inland. I get that the weather was meant to set the mood, but I really thought it badly stereotyped this part of England, and I was sick of the rain. It also meant that some of the characters' choices were bizarre. I lost track of the number of times they stood out in absolutely pouring rain, getting drenched to the skin, and in Margot Robbie's case, often wearing completely inappropriate clothing for the outdoors. More on costumes in a minute. None of them ever came down with pneumonia, though. To sum up, the look of the movie is somewhere between a fairy tale and a Tim Burton movie, but the difference is that Tim Burton fully commits to this look and also usually has a fantastical, even supernatural element to his stories, rather than having them set in the real world. Without that undertone, this halfway house between reality and fantasy is quite jarring. Chapter 6. Costumes and Makeup. The costumes in this film are another aspect of it which was being criticised even before the movie's release, as trailers and set photos made their way onto the internet. There are good reasons for this. The silhouettes are, broadly speaking, quite close to being correct for the time period, more so for the men than the women, and the clothes are certainly beautiful, with Robbie spending much of the film in a succession of gorgeous gowns that wouldn't be out of place on a Vogue cover or a princess movie. But the fabrics are very anachronistic, the aesthetics are very 2020s with sheer sleeves, and the ball gowns that Cathy often wears in the middle of the day when she's traipsing across the moors or riding a horse are ridiculous. There's also a shot of her in a wedding dress with a cathedral-length veil walking over fields to the church. It's ludicrous too, and another instance of a failure of internal logic in the movie. Some of the dresses look like they came off the set of Barbie, especially Catherine's wedding night outfit, and we also get the obligatory corset scene we see so often in period movies, where Robbie is being laced into it like a torture device with no shift under it. All the dress historians out there are going to scream at the screen when they see it, as the idea that corsets were worn like this or were this uncomfortable is a piece of near pseudo-history. They were designed to be supportive undergarments, and if they hadn't been, they wouldn't have been used for centuries. The hair and makeup are clearly 21st century too. Robbie often wears her hair almost entirely loose, for instance, though I did think that her look towards the end of the film, as she grows weaker and weaker and eventually dies, did a good job of showing her decline and making her look like a corpse. The obviously modern lipstick and eyeliner in other places felt quite disjointed for a movie set in this period though, and though it is possible to have a gothic film that feels somehow modern in terms of the hair and makeup, think of Sleepy Hollow, as I said earlier, it needs to have a dark fairy tale feeling, which I found lacking here. Chapter 7. Tone and Themes. The tone of the movie is a gothic romantic tragedy, and Fennell does pull this off. Unlike some films which can't decide what feeling they are going for, this is tonally consistent throughout and never really leaves you in any doubt that everything is going to come to a very unfortunate end. In fact, I only smiled once during a scene to do with a pile of eggs, and I'll not give away what happens in case you haven't seen it yet. She also includes some of Bronte's original dialogue, especially at the more tortured moments, which was a very nice touch. What the film is not, despite what you may have read in the press, is some sort of 50 Shades of Grey meets the 18th century. Though there is a lot more physical romance than in the book, where we actually only see Heathcliff and Cathy kiss once on the night of her death, there is no nudity here, and a scene involving what I'm going to call horseplay mostly takes place off camera. There are plenty of make-out sessions and innuendo, and Jacob Elordi goes without his shirt quite a few times, but its 15 rating feels appropriate, and Robbie was not obliged to lose her clothes in the way that she infamously had to for The Wolf of Wall Street. All that being said, I felt the marketing of the film as a Valentine's Day movie was very odd and even a little bit misleading. It's not a classic romance, and your date is liable to walk out of the theatre crying at the end, which doesn't really set a romantic mood. It reminds me a little bit of the marketing for the movie It Ends With Us in 2024, which was also about a very toxic relationship, but was often portrayed as a great girls' night out that you should wear your florals to. I think the tone of the marketing and the tone of the film need to be in alignment, and that is not really the case here. Chapter 8. Conclusions. Honestly, given the changes to the plot, the issues with the casting, and the seeming unwillingness to commit to a realistic look for the film, I was surprised that Fennell didn't choose to go what I'm going to call the clueless 10 Things I Hate About You, Cruel Intentions, Bridget Jones route, all of which are based on classic works of literature, and just set this in the modern era, making it either a high school or college romance with a dark ending, just like Cruel Intentions. Or perhaps it could have been a modern romance between a couple in their 30s. That would have enabled the movie to keep the essence of the story, but without anyone saying, Emily Brontë didn't write that, so don't do it. We saw Stephanie Meyer, who wrote the Twilight Saga, take elements of Wuthering Heights, for instance, in her stories, with the rivalry between Edward and Jacob and Bella's death in childbirth. And she even mentioned Bronte's book in one of her own, which led to a boost in sales for Emily's novel, by the way. This one foot in, one foot out approach to a period piece didn't really do it for me, though I accept that is likely influenced by my background as an historian. Fennell has said in interviews that this is just her interpretation of the book, which is why the title is in inverted commas, and that she's trying to recapture the way it made her feel as a 14-year-old. I certainly believe this, as it does indeed feel like a teenage fantasy of what the story could be like if only she could fix Heathcliff, in inverted commas, to an extent, and he and Cathy could have their affair. I'm afraid that just isn't the story, though. Jacob Elordi is not portraying Bronte's Heathcliff here. Margot Robbie is not portraying the Catherine of the book, and if Fennell didn't want to modernise the story, then I wish she'd been prepared to do the book justice. I promised you a list of reasons to see and avoid this movie, so let's finish by summarising those. Watch it for the great acting, the beautiful scenery, and the gorgeous, if inaccurate, costumes. If you've never read the book or don't mind it being butchered and can overlook some internal logic problems, you may well find yourself caught up in the plot as well, though even those with only a vague grasp of history and societal norms in late 18th century England will recognise some serious inconsistencies here. The stylised nature of the interiors and some of the exteriors is also something which, as I've said, appeals to some more than others and which you may well like. Reasons to avoid this movie include the changes to the plot compared to the book, assuming you care about that, the odd casting decisions, the lack of historical accuracy when it comes to the costumes, the plot holes and lack of internal logic I've discussed, and the naughty bits if that's not something you want to see in a film. The colourblind casting and whitewashing of Heathcliff also means there is not as much depth to the story as there is in the book. The movie entirely avoids the issue of race that Brontë raised and which could have been so interesting to explore. It does touch on class and money differences as she did, but in quite a superficial way, and I would have liked to see a deeper exploration of the themes of intergenerational trauma and abusive family relations which Brontë wrote about. With so much of the book plot erased or changed though, there was much less scope to do this. Personally, this is a one and done for me. I've seen it, but I don't think I'll seek it out for a rewatch. I'm giving it 2 stars out of 5, maybe 2.5 on a good day, but to demonstrate to you what a polarising Marmite film this is, the person I went to see it with enjoyed it much more and rated it 4 out of 5. Please do remember to like and hype this video and subscribe to the channel, and for more from me, check out my Patreon site, website and book, all linked in the description box and pinned comment for you. Let me know below if you've seen Wuthering Heights or if you plan to, and for more from me, check out my videos looking at the history of the Brontë family, how historical fiction is misleading millions, or my review of Bridgerton Season 4 Part 1. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep learning.